In the year 2005, a young man named Erik gained admission into Nnamdi Azikiwe University, located in Awka, a bustling city known for its vibrant student life and academic pursuit. But for a number of students like Erik, the university had another, more hidden identity. Among members of a secretive group known as the Supreme Vikings Confraternity, the campus was referred to by a coded name, Fatolinia Marine Patrol. This was not just slang, it was a symbolic title that reflected the group's stronghold and influence within the university's walls during that time. Erik had just begun his academic journey, eager to explore new experiences and make his mark. It was during this impressionable phase that he came into close contact with an older student known as Wiseman. This individual wasn't just any senior, he was a respected figure within the Supreme Vikings. His calm demeanor, confidence, and the respect he commanded among his peers quickly earned Erik's admiration. Wiseman took a special interest in Erik and slowly began introducing him to the ideals and brotherhood of the Vikings. Wiseman presented the confraternity as a family, one that looked out for its members and offered strength, identity, and protection in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. Eventually, with continuous encouragement and persuasion, Erik made the decision to join. What followed was an intense initiation process, one that tested his physical and mental resilience. Upon successful completion, Erik was officially welcomed into the fold. However, life as a Viking was far from easy. Erik soon discovered that membership came with responsibilities, expectations, and exposure to a different kind of lifestyle, one that stood in sharp contrast to the structured routine of academic life. He was introduced to a world where certain habits were seen as symbols of toughness and loyalty. Late nights became normal, lectures were skipped more often, and peer influence grew stronger than any textbook. Wiseman, acting as Erik's mentor, or godfather, as they called it within the group, took it upon himself to guide the new member. He educated Erik on the principles, codes, and boundaries that every Viking was expected to follow. These included loyalty, secrecy, courage, and above all, unity. Erik listened intently, absorbing all he could from his senior's teachings, hoping to earn the same respect and admiration that Wiseman had. But Erik's path soon took a troubling turn. One day, Wiseman and a few other senior members of the group allegedly planned a coordinated attack on a nearby supermarket. According to whispers within the campus and local gossip, the aim was to secure a large sum of money. Wiseman, in a show of trust, or perhaps as a test of loyalty, brought Erik along with them. Though Erik wasn't directly involved in the main act, he was assigned a critical role. His task was to keep watch from outside, to act as a lookout and alert the others in case of any unexpected interference. For Erik, it was a moment of tension and anxiety. The mission unfolded just as planned, with the group allegedly leaving the scene quickly and efficiently, taking with them a significant amount of money. Following the incident, the participants, including Erik, retreated to a local beer parlor to unwind and celebrate what they considered a successful operation. The mood was high. Laughter filled the air, and there was a sense of triumph among them. It was supposed to be a moment of bonding, a victory shared among brothers. But for Erik, that night marked the beginning of a long series of troubles. Though he had been praised for his calm demeanor and ability to follow instructions, something inside him began to shift. The excitement that once surrounded the idea of belonging started to fade, slowly replaced by a sense of unease. The weight of his choices began to settle in, and Erik would soon realize that the life he had stepped into was far more complicated and dangerous than he had ever imagined. As the warm evening settled over Awka City, the atmosphere inside the modest beer bar just off the university campus was lively but calm. Erik sat at a table surrounded by several members of the Supreme Vikings Confraternity, including his mentor, Wiseman. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking bottles, and the low hum of music playing from an old speaker. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a reward for a successful outing that earlier in the day had bonded them further as a brotherhood. As they settled into their seats and began enjoying their drinks, their attention shifted to a group of 4 young men seated across the room. These men had arrived earlier and were quietly sipping their drinks, chatting among themselves without causing any disturbance. At first glance, they seemed like ordinary students enjoying their evening, just like any other group. But there was something about their composure, their subtle gestures, and the way they scanned the room that hinted at a shared understanding. Unbeknownst to the Vikings, these 4 individuals were members of another campus brotherhood, the Buccaneers Confraternity. One of the more outspoken Viking members, feeling a surge of pride and perhaps emboldened by the group's earlier triumph, leaned toward Erik and issued a directive. With a smirk, he told Erik to walk over to the 4 men and inform them that they needed to vacate the premises immediately. The Vikings, he claimed, wanted the entire bar to themselves. To him, it was about dominance, an expression of control over the space, as if their presence alone entitled them to full possession of the establishment. Erik hesitated. The request seemed unnecessary, even reckless. The bar was spacious enough to accommodate everyone comfortably. There was no need for confrontation, especially on a night meant for celebration. He voiced his concern to the group, suggesting they simply enjoy their drinks without troubling the others. But his response wasn't met with understanding. Instead, the mood shifted. A few of the Vikings exchanged glances and chuckled, while others looked at him with narrowed eyes. To them, Erik's reluctance wasn't prudence, it was weakness. Wise men, watching the interaction in silence, gave Erik a long, unreadable look. The pressure mounted quickly. One of the senior members leaned in again, this time with a tone of finality. "Go," he said. "Do what you've been told." In that moment, Erik understood something clearly. In the world he had stepped into, obedience was not optional. Duty, once assigned, had to be carried out, no matter the consequences. Swallowing his hesitation, he rose from his seat and made his way toward the 4 men, each step heavy with doubt. When he reached their table, Erik maintained a calm and respectful tone. "Excuse me," he began, trying to sound confident, "my people want to use the entire bar. It'd be better if you could round up your drinks quickly and leave." The men looked up at him slowly. One of them raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the request. Another leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, measuring Erik with a sharp gaze. Then came the response, quiet but firm, "You don't own this place, and you have no right to ask us to leave. This is a public bar. We're not going anywhere." Tension thickened in the air. What started as a calm conversation quickly escalated into an exchange of heated words. Erik tried to remain composed, but the pushback only fueled the hostility. Voices rose, chairs shifted, and within moments, the energy in the bar changed entirely. Back at the Vikings table, the others noticed the rising commotion. They could hear the firm responses, see the unshaken posture of the 4 men, and they didn't like what they were witnessing. From their perspective, this wasn't just a refusal, it was a challenge. And challenges had to be answered. Several Viking members stood up, their expressions hardening. They began to move toward Erik and the Buccaneers, slowly at first, but with a clear purpose. As they closed the distance, the Buccaneers realized they were outnumbered. Still, they stood their ground. What followed was a chaotic moment that would later become campus legend. The Vikings reached the table and, with swift aggression, overturned drinks, knocked over chairs, and broke any illusion of peace. The Buccaneers, faced with overwhelming numbers and a growing crowd, had no choice but to retreat. They exited the bar in haste, but not without leaving behind a trail of fierce glances and unspoken threats. The air was thick with tension, and everyone present knew that this was not the end, it was the beginning of something much bigger. For Erik, this incident marked a turning point. Though he had only delivered a message, the fallout tied him directly to the confrontation. He had officially drawn the attention, and perhaps the ire, of the Buccaneers. That night, as the bar slowly returned to its usual rhythm and the Vikings resumed their drinks, Erik couldn't shake the feeling that his journey within the confraternity was about to take a much darker turn. About a month had passed since the confrontation at the beer bar, the night when Erik, along with other members of the Supreme Vikings Confraternity, clashed with a group of young men who later turned out to be part of the Buccaneers brotherhood. For most people, time would have softened the memory, but in the world of campus rivalries, especially among these secretive groups, grudges didn't disappear so easily. On a quiet afternoon in 2005, Erik decided to pay a visit to someone staying at a popular student hostel known as Marvelous Hostel. This hostel was located in the Ifite area of Awka, a neighborhood known among students for its blend of lodging spaces and small entertainment spots. Not far from the hostel was a hotel called White View Hotel, which stood like a landmark in the area. Back then, that entire vicinity carried a reputation. Students would often refer to it as a hot zone, a place where anything could happen, and trouble was never too far away. Erik didn't think much of it. The sun was still up, and the streets were fairly quiet. He entered Marvelous Hostel, spent some time inside, and then eventually stepped out to begin his walk back home. The road he took was a narrow footpath that ran behind the hostel, flanked by overgrown bushes and unfinished buildings. It was the kind of path that people usually avoided when walking alone, especially during odd hours. But Erik, unaware of what lay ahead, walked on. What he didn't know was that danger was already waiting. One of the young men from that bar altercation, a member of the Buccaneers who had been chased out that night, had spotted Erik earlier while he was inside the hostel. The moment he recognized him, he didn't hesitate to reach out to his fellow group members. To them, this was an opportunity to send a message, a personal reminder of the past and a warning for the future. As Erik continued down the path, completely unaware, he suddenly found himself surrounded. From behind the trees and around the corners of the buildings, several figures emerged. It happened so quickly that he barely had time to process what was going on. Before he could speak, they had already closed in on him. The group of Buccaneers stood in front of him with firm, unforgiving expressions. There was no mistaking who they were. And they made it very clear why they were there. One of them stepped forward and spoke with a calm but stern voice, "Do you remember us? That bar, you and your people thought you were kings." In that moment, Erik's heart sank. He knew instantly what this was about. He remembered the bar, the overturned drinks, the loud voices, the pride that had filled the air that night. And now, that same pride was gone, replaced by fear and regret. He tried to explain, to plead for understanding. His voice trembled as he asked for forgiveness, assuring them that he meant no harm, that he had only done what he was told. But his words fell on deaf ears. The Buccaneers were not in the mood for explanations. They saw his actions as disrespectful, and they were there to make sure it didn't happen again. What followed was a deeply humiliating experience for Erik. The group made sure to let out their anger and frustration. They didn't use anything beyond their hands, but their actions were enough to send a message that would be hard to forget. It wasn't just about physical pain, it was about breaking his spirit, about putting fear in his heart. After what felt like an eternity, they finally stepped back. One of them, breathing heavily, pointed a finger in Erik's face and said coldly, "Let this be the last time. Don't ever cross our path again. Next time, you won't walk away." And with that, they disappeared into the shadows from where they had come. Erik was left on the path, dazed and battered. His shirt was torn, and dust clung to his skin. He staggered up and slowly began the walk back to his own lodge, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he finally reached home, he locked the door behind him and sank into a chair. He felt defeated, not just physically, but emotionally. This wasn't what he had envisioned when he joined the confraternity. He had imagined strength, respect, and a sense of belonging. But in that moment, he felt none of those things. Instead, he felt exposed, alone, and confused about everything he had become a part of. He sat quietly for a long time, nursing his bruises and replaying the event over and over in his head. Should he tell Wiseman and the other Vikings what had happened? Would they see him as weak for getting overpowered? Or would they retaliate, causing the situation to escalate even further? The fear of starting a bigger conflict lingered in his mind. But doing nothing also didn't sit right with him. What if the Buccaneers came after him again? What if this was only the beginning? Erik was caught in a storm of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. His next move could change everything. He had a decision to make, and deep down, he knew that whatever choice he made would shape the rest of his life in ways he could not yet imagine. After the encounter with the Buccaneers near Marvelous Hostel, Erik returned home in pain and deep thought. For days, the memory of that lonely path and the ambush replayed in his mind like a haunting echo. He nursed his injuries silently, keeping to himself and avoiding questions from other students. The humiliation he felt wasn't just physical, it reached deep into his spirit. He had joined the Supreme Vikings Confraternity believing in brotherhood, protection, and pride, but what he had experienced left him feeling vulnerable and alone. Erik wrestled with the idea of informing his fellow Vikings about what had happened. It would have been easy to walk into their gathering and tell them everything. And he knew exactly how they would respond. They would not let it slide. The Vikings, known for their loyalty to their members and their unflinching desire for retaliation, would no doubt seek revenge. A confrontation would erupt again, this time far more serious than what happened in the bar. It could lead to days, even weeks, of violent clashes. And Erik, being the one who triggered the chain of events, would find himself at the center of it all. But Erik wasn't ready for that. He was still relatively new to the confraternity world. The hardened mindset that most members developed over the years had not fully taken root in him. His conscience still held on to the peaceful life he once lived before joining the cult. He didn't want to be responsible for another round of bloodshed. So, after long hours of reflection, he made a decision: he would keep quiet about the incident. He would let the matter die naturally. Time passed, and campus life moved on. Then came the year 2006, and with it, a storm that would shake the very foundations of the university's secret societies. A former Viking member, popularly known on campus, returned to Awka City. He had long graduated from the institution, but he came back to visit some of his godsons and check on the new generation of Vikings still active on campus. In the Viking confraternity structure, once a member graduates, he assumes a higher rank and is referred to as an XY, a status that commands great respect and influence within the group. This particular Viking XY was respected by many, feared by others. His return was meant to be brief, a quiet visit to rekindle old bonds. But things took a dark turn. While moving around the city one evening, he was attacked by members of the Black Axe Confraternity. It was a planned assault. The attackers meant to make a statement, and though the Viking XY survived the encounter, he did so in the most painful way imaginable. The attack left him severely wounded, physically and emotionally. The Vikings did not take the assault lightly. Word spread quickly through the campus. Within days, whispers of revenge turned into shouts of war. Meetings were held in secret. Messages were passed from one lodge to another. What followed was a full-blown confraternity war between the Vikings and the Black Axe. The quiet tension that had always existed beneath the surface now exploded into open hostility. Students who were not involved in any confraternity began to live in fear. Many avoided late nights, gatherings, and even classes. The university environment turned cold and dangerous. And in the heart of it all, the violence escalated. During one of the clashes, a known cultist who went by the name Collins was brought down. His passing shook both camps. The war had become personal, with both sides vowing never to back down. Every night brought new reports of attacks, ambushes, and disappearances. Erik, still trying to find his place within the Vikings, was caught in the storm. What made things worse for him was that his mentor and godfather, Wise Man, had already left Awka before the war fully exploded. He had relocated to Asaba, another city where many Vikings had strong networks. Without Wise Man's guidance and protection, Erik felt exposed. Then came the moment that made Erik's situation even more terrifying. One evening, while he was away from his lodge, a group of Black Axe members, believed to be part of a hit squad, invaded his residence. They had come with a clear plan. Erik had been mapped out as a target. Whether it was due to his earlier involvement with the Vikings, or simply because of his growing reputation among confraternity circles, he was now seen as someone who needed to be dealt with. By sheer luck, Erik was not at home that night. Neighbors who witnessed the event said the men arrived quietly, in twos and threes, blending in with the shadows. When they realized Erik was not inside, they didn't stay long. But the message was clear: his life was now at serious risk. That night, when Erik heard what had happened, he made a decision. He couldn't stay in Awka any longer. The city had become a battlefield, and he was no longer willing to risk his life for a cause he didn't fully understand anymore. Within 48 hours, Erik packed what little he could and left the city without telling anyone, not even his closest Viking brothers. He vanished from campus life, abandoning his education and the confraternity world altogether. For Erik, survival had become more important than loyalty or pride. Meanwhile, the war between the Vikings and the Black Axe continued to rage across the city. Lodge houses became unsafe, night streets turned into danger zones, and students lived each day with uncertainty. Erik, now far away from Awka, would look back at those days with a mixture of fear, regret, and relief. He had walked into a world he barely understood, and narrowly escaped with his life.